I'm going to let you in on a secret. The way you can win your fantasy football leagues is if you draft players at the best value and avoid players at bad values. Now, it seems kind of obvious, but we're going to break down what that means and who those players are in your fantasy drafts this year on today's episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. Welcome in. My name is Lucas Wenzel. I don't have either of my co-hosts with me. This is the first time in a long time that has happened, but have no fear. I have called in backup. I have called in very resourceful backup. Friend of the show, Alex Caruso, joins us today. Alex, thanks for taking the time to join me, join the show. Where can the people find you? What are you up to in the fantasy football world? How can the people find you? Because you have so much great content that people will benefit from.
I think the main place people can find me just on Twitter at Alex Caruso, posting a stat pretty much every single hour that is going to help you win your fantasy football league. I also will have a newsletter debuting in just a week or two that plan to get going. In addition, you can always find content every week at the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. Episodes dropping every single Tuesday and Friday. But Lucas, I'll join a show with you anytime, any day. I love talking fantasy football with you, and I'm super excited for today.
I remember when we had you on last year, we did a mock draft and it was just like an encyclopedia of knowledge just flowing out of you. And like, that's what you get when you follow Alex on Twitter. So make sure you go do that. He has a ton of great content that is not only engaging, but absolutely resourceful and will help you win your fantasy football leagues this year. We're going to go ahead. We're going to give you a few of the best and worst values in our opinion in fantasy drafts this year. We're also going to break down what goes into identifying a good versus bad value. That seems like a very simple sentence. Like you don't need to know that information, but we'll get into some basic questions on what goes in to our analysis when we're projecting or deciding what a good or bad value is in your fantasy drafts. Enough of the intro though. Let's actually get to discussing these players, these strategies. Let's dive on it. I never know how people are going to react when I play that because I'm like, I think they listen, and then I see Alex grooving over here. I'm like, all right, he likes it. Let's dive in though, Alex. How do we decide what a good and bad value is in fantasy drafts? Let's just start with this. When you were choosing your players for this episode, when you're going through your fantasy drafts and deciding, man, this player is a good value, or this player, man, I am totally avoiding them at their current value. What goes into deeming these players good or bad values? Is it purely ADP? Is it projections? Is it just like gut feeling that you have? Because I know that's how some people draft, but what goes into it for you when deciding a good or bad value?
I think the thing that I always look for in value is just finding players who have a really good chance to beat where they're going in drafts. Like I know that's really simple, but just simply finding players that I think that just should be taken earlier in fantasy football drafts and finding players that have a lot of reasons why. So I think all my players are going outside the top 20 at their position today. And those are all guys that I think should be going inside their top 20, if not better for the most part. And just finding guys that have guaranteed workloads and are going to see really big roles in their offense that also have potential for fantasy stardom if everything goes right.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you bring up is it's people outside of the top 20, but it's also not people like I'm looking at some of your players on the dock. Like it's also nobody that's like way down as like the wide receiver 50 or anything like that, right? Like we're looking for guys who are probably going in the flex range that actually have a really good chance to be a weekly starter in your fantasy lineup. I asked this question to Dave Kluge of Football Guys. We had him on 2 weeks ago. We talked about sleepers, and I asked him the question of what differentiates a sleeper from a value at ADP. So I'm actually going to inverse the question and have basically ask you the same thing, but what is the difference between a value at ADP and a sleeper?
I think that a value at ADP is more somebody that is going to at least beat where they're going, but not necessarily do something really big beyond that. Where someone like a sleeper is somebody that people aren't talking about enough, but has a chance to be more of like a league winner type player. I think that's how I would view it, where values are more players that, you know, like something's on sale at the grocery store. You know, I'll pick that up because it's 50 cents cheaper. But a sleeper is like one of those, you know, crazy, you know, items you see on Instagram or TikTok that, you know, is going for really cheap, but ends up being like one of your favorite things. Like I bought this little air conditioner off of Amazon that I saw on Instagram for $20, and it cools like my entire room. And I have like a big room, but it's like one of those finds that it was a total sleeper, but it had way more upside than something that just has like a little bit of on sale type value.
Send that Amazon link to me. I need that for my puny little 650 square foot apartment. But I actually think that's a great analogy though. Because I look at it the same way. Like a sleeper is somebody who, yes, I think is undervalued. I also think there's a lot more risk involved there. I don't think it's like as big of a lock. Like,
yeah.
Like I think of like, I've seen people throw around the name of like Cam Akers as a sleeper. I'm like, well, I don't know. He's getting quite a bit of buzz. Quite a bit of people are on him. But, if you're telling me he's going as, the RB 26, well, yeah, I might consider him a value at ADP then, considering where I have him in my rankings. But that is also very different than a sleeper in my mind. So I like how you broke that down. I 100% agree with that and that analogy in there. That's just gold. Now that we've kind of identified a lot of those key traits and what we look for, let's actually start talking about some of the best and worst values that people can find in their fantasy drafts this year that are going to give them a leg up over their opponents this year. And I'm looking at your list, Alex, and I'm so looking forward to you starting with this first player because I have been pounding the table repeatedly for this player all off season. I get flack every time I post a video about him or include him in a video. I now have Alex Caruso, Twitter guru, on the show to explain why your first player is actually a tremendous value at their ADP.
Yeah, I think that this one has to be as easy of a pick as you can make in fantasy football, and it's James Conner. And it's simply just because, one, he has no competition behind him. He has Keontae Ingram, who averaged 2.2 yards per carry as a rookie, and Corey Clement, who's never hit 100 touches in a season. And James Conner has averaged 17 touches per game over the last 2 years. And a lot of people are, always saying in my videos when I make about him are, oh, well, Kyler Murray's not going to play, and, their offense can be really bad. Well, in the 8 games that Kyler Murray has missed over the last 2 years, James Conner averages 22.5 fantasy points per game in those games, which would be the running back 1 overall in 2021 and 2022. James Conner is also going as the running back 26 right now in drafts, Lucas. And he has been a top 25 player in points per game for 5 straight years. He has also been a top 10 running back in fantasy points per game in 2 straight years, back-to-back years. He has no competition for touches. He has been nothing but productive with or without Kyler Murray, and he is one of the safest roles in the NFL. Last stat I'll give for people is the fact that I charted every running back since 2000 to see 17 touches per game, which James Conner is easily going to hit with this backfield. 96% of those players finish top 24. So he's pretty much just off volume alone as a lock for top 24 with a lot of potential for a lot more.
His receiving pace too. He was on pace for right around 70 targets last year. Like that was going to be 7th most, if I remember my numbers correctly, in the league last year.
Well, beyond that, he also was 3rd in the NFL in routes per game. So when they're trailing, it's actually a good thing for James Conner. Yeah. The only players that ran more routes than him were Austin Eckler and Leonard Fournette. He ran more routes per game than Josh Jacobs, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, or any other running back you can name in the NFL that is not Fournette or Eckler.
People say the Cardinals will be bad. Yeah, they're 4-13 last year. Don't give me that argument. He's the second best playmaker on that team. Let's be honest. It's Hollywood Brown and James Conner. If they're going to generate any sort of offense, it's going to come by those two. I almost put Hollywood Brown in here, but we've talked about him so much recently in our neck of the woods that I thought I'd spare people another sermon on Marquise Brown. But yeah, I'm going to move on because I absolutely love James Conner this year. He is by far one of my favorite values at ADP as well. I'm going to switch over. I'm going to talk about quarterback, actually. And Alex, if we were to make a list of guys who could throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns this year, if we were to make like a top 5 list, I honestly think there'd only be like 3 people I'd feel really good about. One of those is obviously Patrick Mahomes. I don't think we need much explanation on that one. I think Joe Burrow could do it as well, given the nature of that offense. I think Justin Herbert is the other one. And I am absolutely loving him at his quarterback 7 ADP this year. Obviously, he was incredibly disappointing last year. Quarterback 15 in fantasy points per game, only 25 passing touchdowns after having 31 and 38 the 2 years prior. Only 147 rushing yards. That doesn't seem too significant, but he had topped out 230 the first 2 years in the league. So that's also fantasy value that we do miss out on. And maybe the thing that baffled me the most, which I kind of makes sense when I give the other context, but he only had 6.5 air yards per attempt last year. Out of all quarterbacks, that was 32nd. Last I checked, there was 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. That's not a good number. But I'd be remiss if I didn't name all the things that went wrong for him in 2022. I'll just go in chronological order. Week 1, Keenan Allen, grade 2 hamstring strain. He's gone until week 11. Justin Herbert himself fractures his rib cartilage, and he plays through it the rest of the season. Now, if you're a quarterback, that can't be a comfortable injury when you're torquing your upper body to throw, and it's not comfortable. It's not fun to play through. Rashawn Slater, offensive lineman, ruptures his bicep. He's done for the season. Mike Williams, high ankle sprain in week 7. He's gone until week 14. And then icing on the cake, we didn't learn until this offseason now that Herbert was playing through a labrum tear in his left shoulder the entire year last season. He finally got surgery on that in January. So the only thing that didn't go wrong for Herbert was that he still had Austin Eckler, knock on wood. That's still the case for this year. But things will be better for him in 2023. Like, the only route for him is up. Entire offense is back and healthy. They gave him another weapon, first-round draft capital on wide receiver Quentin Johnson out of TCU. And now, Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator. And I hear the jokes all the time. Look at the plays he ran in the playoffs with Dak. Oh, he's so easy to clown. During his time as Dallas's offensive coordinator, though, second in scoring, second in total offense, fourth in passing offense. And last season, from week 7 on, Dak was a quarterback 6 in fantasy football, despite throwing 14 interceptions during that span. That's an absurd number. Most NFL quarterbacks don't hit 14 interceptions in a season, let alone from week 7 to 18. So here's the question I'll then ask you, Alex. This is where you can chime in. Who's the better NFL quarterback, Dak or Justin Herbert?
No, it's Justin Herbert. Beyond that, Kellen Moore, top 2 in pace every year with the Cowboys. Justin Herbert also has finished as the QB9, QB2, and QB11. QB11, where everything went wrong, going as the QB7 right now. So he's a locked in, top 12 quarterback with a QB1 overall upside. You add Quentin Johnston. They also, Graham Barfield tweeted out today that among all 57 chartable quarterbacks last year, Justin Herbert was 56th in yards per attempt, ahead of only Colt McCoy for the Cardinals that we talked about. And every day so far in training camp, all Justin Herbert has done is just chuck the ball all over the field. They said it's going to be a completely different offense. I'm all in on Justin Herbert as well. Yeah,
they're going to throw the ball a ton this year. Herbert was still second in pass attempts last year, too. That's the crazy thing. Despite how bad he was still chucking the ball all over the place. His efficiency is going to get better. Can literally only go up. Oh, and not to mention, he's a $262 million man now. I will gladly draft that investment that the Chargers made in him with all the upgrades on offense. That's a quarterback 7 this year. He has top 5 upside, clear and away. He is by far my favorite quarterback value this year. I'm picking him up wherever I can. I'll kick it back to you, Alex. Who is your second favorite value at ADP?
It's got to be Christian Watson. Christian Watson, I know that the immediate thing that every single person in my TikTok comments, Twitter comments, anyone listening to this podcast is saying, well, probably Jordan Love. And that is fine. But Christian Watson put up some of the most elite numbers we have ever seen for a rookie wide receiver in terms of advanced metrics. My favorite Christian Watson stat is the fact that he put up over a 2.25 yards per route run. And there have only been 7 wide receivers to ever do that in their rookie year. Every single one of those 7 finished in the top 7 fantasy wide receivers in points per game their next year. So pretty much if you put those numbers, they were guaranteed to finish top 7 at the wide receiver position. Christian Watson was also number 1 in fantasy points per route last year. Every other player in the top 10 right now that finished in the top 10 of that stat is going as the wide receiver 11 or better. And Watson's going outside the top 20. He also was top 5 in air yards per route run. He had over a 30% red zone target share over the second half of 2022. And if you just do fantasy points per game among players that played over 60% of the snaps in the game, Christian Watson was top 5 last year over the whole season. In just the games that he played over 60% of the snaps, he was as good as any player in the NFL. I know Jordan Love. I hear you people. but there's no one. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the perfect example last year where everyone was just doubting him because he put up all those crazy advanced metrics, but they're like, oh, Jared Goff or target competition. But when guys put themselves in those elite buckets, they produce. Christian Watson's going to do it this year. Make sure you draft him.
I mean, and when you think about it, the only pushback that I can give, because I saw he was on your list, and I'm like, interesting. I think he's a fine value. I don't know if he's, in my mind, one of the best values, but that's only because of Jordan Love. Like, I can't refute anything that you just said. That's coming from a guy who also like thrives on numbers. I literally studied analytics in college. Like this is something that I love. Here's what I'll ask. On a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous are you for Jordan Love, though, to try and feed Christian Watson the ball? Because I think we can identify him as one of the best values. I'm totally fine with that. I agree with you in every sense of the argument. I think we'd be remiss to not name some of that nervousness. No, would we not?
Yeah, no, it's totally fine if people feel nervous about it. Like if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. But like At the same time, like their wide receiver 3 right now is a guy named Samori Toure. And if you know who Samori Toure is, like good on you. There's no target competition. They have 2 rookie tight ends, Samori Toure, and their only competition is Romeo Doubs, who was not very good last year. Watson going to be the clear wide receiver 1 on this team. I think that his floor is where he's going right now. And again, the jump for wide receivers from year 1 to year 2 is pretty ridiculous. And you would be remiss if you do not draft Christian Watson.
I cannot deny. At the end of the day, I don't care how bad the quarterback play is. If you can get volume in an offense that will likely need to pass the ball a lot, we'll see how much Green Bay needs to pass the ball. But at the end of the day, if you can get a lead target getter on a team, as the wide receiver, what is he going as wide receiver 21 in drafts right now? That's value I'm willing to scoop up at the right price. I'll keep us moving here. My second favorite value, I'm going to stick in the NFC North. David Montgomery, and he's not a sexy name. He's just one of the most unsexy names I could probably bring up. But like, I just want to throw this out there. He's going as the running back 30 on Sleeper. He's going after guys like Isaiah Pacheco, Rashad White, Dalvin Cook, who's not even on an NFL roster right now. I don't know how anybody can sensibly do that. Javonte Williams, fresh off a season where he quite literally, his knee basically exploded. It's the same injury as J.K. Dobbins. I understand there's trajectory for Javonte to be back, but I just think running back 30 is such a value. And I want to start with this. There's room for 2 fantasy relevant running backs in Detroit. I think it's pretty clear Dan Campbell is trying to replicate this 2017 1-2 punch of Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, where Ingram was the RB6 and Alvin Kamara was the RB4. He was the assistant coach down in New Orleans at that time. It seems pretty clear he's trying to replicate this. And Monty is very clearly going to be playing early down, short yardage, goal line situations, while Gibbs is the clear receiving and efficiency back out of the 2. And like we've seen this work with Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift already. Obviously, Jamal Williams had 17 total touchdowns last year, the running back 8. Granted, that was a little more hefty on the volume end than what David Montgomery will probably see, but Swift was still the running back 15 in fantasy points per game, despite playing more than 40% of snaps in only 3 games last year. That's just crazy in my mind. Like how he's super efficient with his touches at any rate. I don't want you to hear this as me saying David Montgomery is going to be better than Jahmyr Gibbs this year. I am very much on the record saying that Jahmyr Gibbs has top 10 fantasy upside this year. Alex, I am about 99% sure you agree with me in that. But what, like, I never want to wish ill upon a player, but what happens if something does go wrong for Jahmyr Gibbs? He gets injured. Dan Campbell decides, I don't know, he's just a bit too much like DeAndre Swift and put some evil voodoo on him or something like that, like he did while DeAndre Swift was still a Detroit Lion, right? Like Monty will be the guy then, and he can thrive in this Lions gap scheme. They're not going to be shoving Jahmyr Gibbs in the A gap this year. We've seen Monty be great between the tackles. We've seen him be effective out of the backfield, catching passes. We've seen him pounded in at the goal line. Like there's hidden upside here with Monty, and you're essentially drafting him at what I think will probably end up being his floor this year. Like Jahmyr Gibbs is nice, but he's not this like world-beating Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley. He's a real nice player. Do not get me wrong. But he needs a counterpart like Monty. And he got paid to be that guy. So I'm snatching up all the Monty I can as a running back 30. Like, that's less of an analytical argument than I typically give, but just looking logistically at what role Monty could have in this offense, I think there's a high opportunity for him to produce plenty of relevant fantasy points this year.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, Jamal Williams last year had 38 carries inside the 10, by far the most in the NFL. He had 90 rushes, in the red zone, by far the most in the NFL. Jahmyr Gibbs, whether at Alabama or at Georgia Tech, never saw over 35% of his team's carries in college. It's not going to change the NFL. It's going to be David Montgomery. Again, Jahmyr Gibbs, I still love him in fantasy football, but Montgomery was also really great last year. I mean, he forced a missed tackle on 31% of his rush attempts, number one in the NFL. Jamal Williams was 41st at just 12%. Dan Campbell said himself that we like the ability of David Montgomery to break tackles a little bit better than Jamal did. They're going to have a big role for him. I know it's the running back too, but he is playing in one of the most valuable fantasy football roles. And David Montgomery also finished top 24 every single year of his career. And why are we still doubting this guy?
Because he's an unsexy name, Alex. That's exactly why. Real quick, before we transition on to worst values, give me one more guy, maybe a little bit down the board that you think is actually going at a nice value right now.
I think it's Rashad Penny. And I know that I referenced earlier that values are guys with a higher floor. I think Rashad Penny's the only one that doesn't fit this, but I think some of the numbers with Rashad Penny are just too good to not bring up. I mean, going as the running back 37, but in terms of the percentage of a player's runs to go for at least 15 yards, he was top 10 in that category in 2022, led the NFL in that category in 2021. But since 2021, among all running backs with 100 or more total carries per Next Gen Stats, Rashad Penny is first in yards per carry, first in yards after contact, first in rushing yards over expected per carry, and first in rushing expected points added, and is now playing behind a top 5 offensive line in the entire league. That's among running backs with 100 carries. That's it's 50 a season. That's a lot of running backs, and he was number one in every category, and now playing behind a much improved offensive line. And my good friend Deepak Chona at SportsMed Analytics, make sure to check him out, has some really good numbers on Rashad Penny in the history of running backs. And anatomically, he doesn't have any concern that he should be re-injured. It has purely been the most bad luck ever. I know people are going to disagree with that, but all the medical doctors on Twitter are all saying the same thing, that he actually doesn't pose that much risk, and he didn't miss many games in college. He's just been a huge outlier. If he stays healthy for 1 year, he's going to be awesome. Last stat on Rashad Penny, in his career, when he averages just 10 carries a game, when he sees 10 carries, 19 fantasy points, top 10, that's top 5 running back when he sees at least 10 carries. And he was also the first Eagles running back to come off in the first day of training camp. He was the starter. Hopefully he stays healthy and finally does it this year.
I'll bring that up later in the episode when we talk about a different guy. But no, I 100% agree. I will scoop up Rashad Penny at his value gladly any day of the week as my running back 3, running back 4. Whenever I can get him, I will take him. That wraps out the best of values that we have. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with some of the worst values in your fantasy drafts. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back. We're now going to break down the worst values in your fantasy football drafts this year. Alex, I'm going to have you kick us off here. Who is your first worst value in fantasy drafts this year?
My worst value in fantasy football drafts has to be DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, they have been the Titans. It's a Titans thing more than DeAndre Hopkins, and a red flags thing more than the player. I know that everyone's like, well, DeAndre Hopkins was a top 5 wide receiver last year, when he was playing for the Cardinals. That's right. No, you're 100% right. But the Titans have been bottom 7 in pass attempts every single year under Mike Vrabel. And if you look over the last 10 years, There have been just 8 wide receivers to finish top 12 in 10 years that came from these teams that were bottom 7 in pass attempts. 2 of them were last year. In A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Deebo Samuel is another player that has done it, and it's just few and far between. And beyond that, DeAndre Hopkins is 30 years old. He is going to a new team with a new QB, and the thing that's not being talked about enough is that he signed a week ago on July 16th. That is 50 days before week 1. So he is trying to learn this offense in 50 days with a new QB, 30 years old, and they have never passed at a high rate no matter what personnel they have had under Mike Vrabel. It's not going to change this year. I just can't draft DeAndre Hopkins because of all those red flags.
And at what point do you just look at Derrick Henry is still the engine of that runs that offense, right? You bring that up, and I found it interesting you put him on your list because I'm like, I haven't thought about DeAndre Hopkins as a bad value. I just know I didn't like the landing spot, but every time I come to him in drafts, he's not at the top of my list. That is for sure. In the image that was obviously floating around on Twitter, the Titans, the place where all elite wide receivers go to die, the Julio Jones, the Randy Moss, DeAndre Hopkins now on that list. I don't have high hopes for DeAndre Hopkins this year. And you're right. It has nothing to do with him as an NFL wide receiver. It has everything to do with the scheme that he is in, with the offense that he is in, with the quarterback that he is playing with Treylon Burks, who I think could be still a nice player in the NFL. There's just a lot working against DeAndre Hopkins from returning wide receiver 23. Is that what he's going at right now?
Yeah, he's going wide receiver 23. Again, I don't. If he was on the Chiefs at wide receiver 23, I'd be like, he's a great value. He's going to be great this year. It's purely the landing spot and the fact that he has less than 50 days to prepare for the NFL season.
Let's just be real with ourselves and just acknowledge the facts that 100% downgrade him at his current value. I'm going to stick to the wide receiver position as well, and I want to play a game with you. We're gonna play a game of one of these things doesn't belong. Okay. Here's the items that I give you. They're all numbers: 13.0, 21.2, 11.5, 12.5. Which one of those 4 doesn't belong?
I think the 21 doesn't belong, Lucas.
Yeah. The 21.2 does not belong. Those were Deebo's fantasy points per game totals every year of his career. What if, and hear me out, what if Deebo is just a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end flex play? Like, what if that's all that Deebo is? Like, maybe that's a hot take for some. I won't take away that he's played through injuries a bulk of his career. I won't take away, but is that also necessarily a good argument? Like, you're drafting that significant of an injury risk at the wide receiver 18 right now. And this is a game we've all played and gotten burned on before. We hold on to the one shiny outlier season, and then we get burned by it for the next 2 years afterwards. All right, George Bush, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me. You can't get fooled again, right? I'm not going to get fooled again by Deebo Samuel this year. Last year, he averaged 7 less yards per reception than his career 2021 year. He saw nearly 600 less air yards. He scored 9 less touchdowns. He ran 1.36 less yards per route. That might not seem like a big number, but for context, he went from 4th in the league in yards per route run in 2021 to 37th last year. Now we even have data to pin Deebo's 2021 season against. Like, Mike McDaniel was the offensive coordinator for the 49ers when Deebo had his overall wide receiver 2 season. Now he's now with the Miami Dolphins, and you look what he did. Like, just looking at Waddle, these are some pretty familiar numbers I'm looking at here. 18.1 yards per reception. Wow, that's the same as Deebo in 2021. 4th in yards per route run. That same as 2021 Deebo. Like, in the competition for touches, brother, I like Christian McCaffrey, top 5 NFL running back, top 3 tight end. Brandon Ayuk, who is a nice player. And yes, Deebo is one of the best dual threat wide receivers in the league. But what if that 2021 season just doesn't belong? I can't drafting him as a mid wide receiver 2 right now when he's only finished as a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy points per game once in his career.
Yeah, let me add on to that. The other thing that's really important that people need to know, and again, this is not like a fun thing for fantasy football drafters to have me say this, but the 49ers over the last 4 years have been bottom 5 in pass attempts 3 out of the last 4. The only year they didn't was the year where every quarterback was hurt and they had the worst defense in the NFL. When they've had a good defense, they are bottom 5 in pass attempts every single year. Lucas, out of 120 wide receivers to finish top 12 over the last decade, guess how many were on a team that were bottom 5 in pass attempts?
Lay it on me.
2. It was Des Bryant in 2013, which was a long time ago, and Debo. Debo's the only person to do it. But now you have Christian McCaffrey. Brandon Ayuk is getting better. This is not the same team. Debo is a historical outlier in 2019, just like you talked about. Only finished as a top 20 wide receiver in just 3 out of his 13 games last year. Not a good value for me.
No, we both agree on that, and we'll move on to a name that I find interesting here on your list, Alex. I might have some pushback here, but I can also understand why you might think he's actually not that great of a value.
Yeah, it's Miles Sanders for me. I mean, Fantasy Points did a really great job of pointing this out, that Miles Sanders was actually dead last among qualifying running backs in the percentage of his rushing yards after contact in each of the last 2 years. So when he does not, have a really good offensive line, he has not produced very well in fantasy. He also was dead last in yards per target, which usually means that they're not a very good pass catching running back. If they're not seeing if they're not seeing routes and targets beyond the line of scrimmage, that usually means they're not a great route runner if they're only seeing targets behind the line of scrimmage. Mm-hmm. He's also playing behind a worse offense, a worse offensive line, and a worse defense for positive game scripts, which is very important, Lucas. Yeah. I went back and looked at his 10 Eagles losses over the last 2 years, and he has averaged just 6.7 fantasy points per game in PPR in those losses. He has not been good when he does not have a positive game script, and I know he could catch more passes for the Panthers, and that's nice, but he has never hit 10 fantasy points in a game where they lost over the last 2 years.
Okay, so now you're starting to talk me down off of Miles Sanders a little bit, because my excitement for Miles Sanders is look at the opportunity. Yeah. Can we say he might be the best playmaker on that offense? Period?
He totally is. 100%.
Adam Thielen, old, DJ Chark, nice little player, but nothing special. Jonathan Mingo, he could be explosive. We have no clue what he is, though. So part of me is like, what if they just feed him touches to no end? Deuce Staley has said they want to get more involved in the receiving game, but I also think you bring up a really good point of how has he performed in negative game script? Has he been used effectively in negative game script? And given the nature of the weapons, maybe he starts to get involved with that more, but man, less than 10 fantasy points in games that his teams have lost. That's not something I'm necessarily encouraged by, given the fact that he's now on a team that has the chance to finish last in the NFC South. I think you've talked me off a ledge there a little bit. I was thinking Miles Sanders was more of a value, but you've given me a lot more to chew on here, Alex, and you've given the viewers a lot more to chew on too, which is why we have you on the show. I'll keep things moving here, though. I will also stick with a running back. And this is going to pain both of us, Alex. I know how much you love this player in previous years. I fell in love with him too. We talked about it last year when you were on the show. I just can't fathom drafting DeAndre Swift as a running back 23 right now. I can't. And it pains me. I know he's been top 15 in fantasy points per game every year of his career. I know he's been top 5 in fantasy points per opportunity 2 of the past 3 years. I know he got traded to the Eagles, who, as we talked about with Rashad Penny, have an incredible offensive line, have an incredible run game, arguably the best in the NFL. But what if I told you I just don't think it's all that good of a landing spot for him? I won't debate efficiency, right? The Eagles running backs, they averaged 4.6 yards per carry last year. Swift won't find issues having holes in that offense. But my concern for Swift is that he's been on pace for 85 targets, at least 85 targets in each of the past 2 seasons. Jalen Hurts only checked down 16 times last year. He had the lowest check down rate at only 3.4%. Both were lowest in the NFL. And if Swift doesn't get a good load of receiving work, I believe in total last year, the Eagles only had 63 running back targets. Yep. So if he doesn't get a good load of that receiving work, that's going to severely impact his fantasy value. And the other concern I have is, yes, the Eagles will be in scoring position fairly often. I don't think Swift is going to see that goal line work. I think he's never seen more than 32 red zone touches in a season. He's never been better than 25th. Again, albeit he has never played a full season, but let's also not pretend that Jalen Hurts, Rashad Penny, dare I say Boston Scott? Is that crazy for me to think that Boston Scott could beat him out in goal line touches, red zone touches this year? They're all ahead of the pecking order. So if he doesn't have the receiving work, if he doesn't have the goal line opportunities, you mentioned it earlier, Rashad Penny's been running with the ones. I just can't justify his RB23 price tag despite the crazy upside and efficiency he might actually present. I just don't see a straight path to that. I would much rather draft David Montgomery instead.
Completely. I'm in a complete agreement, especially like Rashad Penny's taller. He weighs more, and then you have the tush push that is still legal for the Eagles that they're going to use on the 1 yard line every single time. So I think too much would have to go right for DeAndre Swift. Again, I still think he's one of the top 10 most talented running backs in the NFL. I wish we could just see him traded for Austin Eckler, where Eckler got the insane contract for the Lions, and then Swift was on the Chargers. But again, that is just that's on Earth 2 or another Earth that we just do not live in, unfortunately. So I cannot be buying into Swift.
Yeah, it's Earth 838 if you're into the Marvel world at all. Yeah, I know. I'm with you there. I would love to see Swift in a situation where he can actually thrive, but I don't think that's in Philadelphia this year. Quick player I do want to get your thoughts though on Alex, before we sign off here. Dameon Pierce. He's a player that I've rather staked a rather large flag against this year, not in favor of. He goes off the board as a running back 19 right now on Sleeper. People are saying he's primed for a breakout. I can understand why people are in on him. Explosive runner, great in yards after contact. Like he's an absolute monster. But he's a volume guy. In games with 20 or more touches last year, 16 fantasy points. In games with less than 20 touches, half of that, 8 fantasy points. You bring in Devin Singletary, who can take away some of that receiving work. Like I know we say like Pierce didn't have that much receiving work. I mean, he still had 40 plus targets last year. That's not a bad number. But Devin Singletary, he's no slouch either. Like I think they're going to look to use Pierce and Singletary as a 1-2 punch. What's your take on Devin Singletary? I can't really stomach drafting him as a top 20 running back this year. I don't know if that upside is actually there. But what are your thoughts on Dameon Pierce? Because I feel like he's one that I see a multitude of opinions on every single day.
Yeah, I don't know if I can, buy in on Dameon Pierce. I mean, for the exact reasons that you said, where he's a volume dependent running back. And he also he put up some really nice numbers in terms of like missed tackles and yards after contact and yards created, but all of his per attempt numbers were a lot lower than what he did. So he was not super efficient. I know he wasn't on the Texans, but just as far as efficiency goes for a running back, regardless of their offensive line and their team play around him, he wasn't as efficient as we would like to be. I'm rooting for Dameon Pierce. I hope to goodness I am wrong. Even if I don't draft him, I hope Dameon Pierce becomes the greatest running back of all time. But I just don't think that's really realistic. They have Devin Singletary, who averages 14 touches per game in his career. Again, I just don't want to buy into a bad offense for a guy that probably won't see the same workhorse role. When he was only competing with Rex Burkhead last year, now he's competing with Devin Singletary. He's been a top 24 running back the last couple of years. So I just can't do it.
No, you nailed it right on the head. I didn't even mention the fact that it's still the Texans. It's not like they got all that much better on offense either this offseason. I hope Dameon Pierce does great. I am more than happy to be wrong on players that I stake a claim against and say, I actually don't like them at their value. If they outperform, great, good for them, because rooting against people in general in life is just bogus, but it's also part of what we have to do as fantasy analysts is make judgment calls on who we think are good and bad values in drafts. And that's how we'll wrap up this episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. Thank you again, Alex, for giving us 40 minutes of your time here. Again, where can the people find you on Twitter? Where can they find your work? Super resourceful. You help out so many people. We want to get people connected to you.
Yeah. You can find me at Alex Caruso on Twitter. Find me on TikTok or Instagram, Alex Caruso NFL, or the Fifth Down Fresh Fantasy Podcast. If you hear me want to yell about Christian Watson, James Conner, and all these other players, Belugas, appreciate you having me on. Happy to come on anytime. And it's been a pleasure talking football with you today, as always. We'll have you on anytime, Alex. Thanks for taking the time. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure you do that. Turn on those notifications so you do know when new episodes are up. Subscribe to the podcast as well. Give us a nice little review. Boost us up the podcast ratings a little bit. Otherwise, we will be back next week with a mock draft episode. You can catch all of our other videos on our YouTube channel that we will be posting this week. But until then, we'll see you next time. Deuces.